beauty, spa and wellbeing businesses to give them a much needed boost during these very difficult times.
Mr. Speaker, I completely understand how incredibly tough it is for many businesses, also of course in the sector that she's outlined. Obviously she's raised a point, and I'm sure this is an issue that will be looked at.
Steve Double.
Speaker, could I ask the Secretary of State to confirm that being the first in Europe to develop a horizontal satellite launch facility is not only an ambition of Spaceport Cornwall, but is an integral part of the UK government space ambitions? And could I ask him to meet with me to discuss how the government and UK Space Agency can support Spaceport Cornwall to come forward and deliver this facility for the benefit of the whole UK space industry?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will be aware, the government is committed to the space sector. We have already invested £40 million to achieve satellite launch from the early 2020s, including over £7 million to establish launch services from Spaceport Cornwall, and I'm sure the Science Minister will be happy to meet with him to discuss this further.
Lockhart.
Minister, can I ask the Minister for his assessment of the comments made by Marks and Spencers and Sainsbury's in recent days that goods coming to Northern Ireland there will be a barrier to some will not be made available, and some at an increased cost. Surely this is the result of a sea border. What assurances can he give to the Northern Ireland consumers that come the 1st of January this will not be the case?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear on this issue, and as she will know, we've had the UK Internal Market Bill, and of course we will continue to work on these issues.
Heading back to Suffolk with Dr Dan Poulter. Dr Dan Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will be aware that many businesses in the hospitality industry, pubs, and also some of the wedding industry, is reliant on the 6 weeks in and around Christmas for much of their profits during the winter period. What additional support can he reassure me will be being put into place to support the hospitality industry to make sure that the early part of the new year and the Christmas period is properly recompensed in these difficult circumstances that we face with COVID?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, what I would say to him is that I recognise the difficulty that hospitality sector faces, and of course we want to ensure that as we come out of the national restriction on the 2nd of December, we are able to see businesses move into the tiered areas, and I hope some businesses will be able to reopen. But it's worth pointing out, of course, that pubs and restaurants can continue to operate as takeaways, and there is support available, both including grants up to £3,000 per month, but also additional support funded through the £1.1 billion to local authorities.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Post Office Horizon scandal may well be the largest miscarriage of justice in our history, with over 900 false prosecutions destroying lives, families and reputations. Does the Minister agree that a judge-led inquiry into the scandal is the only way that many sub-postmasters will be satisfied?
The Honourable Lady, which is exactly why we appointed Sir Wyn Williams as a former judge to be able to lead this inquiry. I really hope that representatives of the sub-postmasters will take the time to meet him to see what his approach. He's outlined his engagement strategy, and we really do want to see justice and the answers as soon as possible.
The floor is open.
It's very topical, actually. In August, I was lucky enough to meet Digital Imaging Analysis in Milton Keynes, a fantastic local company that are doing some really cool stuff with space technology, including working with our local university, the Open University, to mine for water on the moon. Perhaps the Minister will join me in congratulating the Open University in their recent successes on that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's world-leading universities have a rich heritage in space science and exploration, and they are key to our ambition of becoming a science superpower. Of course, I will join my honourable friend in congratulating the work of the scientists in his constituency and their groundbreaking research. In fact, we are investing £1.5 million this year in Open University space activities, including Prosper Instrument, which will improve our understanding of water on the moon, And who knows, we might even put the first concrete cow on the moon. You never know.
Excellent. Final question, Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know our economy is changing, supercharged by the impact of COVID and new technologies which are facilitating the change. But does the Minister agree with me that it's desirable and possible for companies to change in a way that protects skilled jobs, whether that's Spotify's responsibility to creative workers or BT's responsibility to our broadband engineers? Will the Minister do all it takes to make sure our companies invest in people as well as digital infrastructure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raised a very important point. Of course, we want to see good jobs being created, good jobs being preserved, and I agree with her. The point I think she's making is that we need to see a greater level of productivity in the country, and that is precisely what we're working on as part of our strategies.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Just before I call John Healy to ask his urgent question, I just want to put on record our thanks for our armed forces for what they're doing during this pandemic. I personally do appreciate it. John Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Defence Secretary if he will make a statement on the deployment of the armed forces to assist civilian authorities in dealing with the continuing COVID pandemic.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his UQ and the opportunity it provides to highlight the vital role of the armed forces in responding to this pandemic. The Secretary of State was pleased to commit to updating colleagues about the latest developments on COVID support by placing regular updates in the House of Commons Library, the first of which will be delivered today. I'm also pleased that the Shadow Secretary of State will be visiting Strategic Joint Command later this week to meet in person the senior military leadership delivering the support across the country. The armed forces are renowned for their planning skills, technical capabilities and ability to provide rapid and effective deployed response. They are being put to good use yet again, Mr. Speaker. At all times, they are acting in support of and at the request of the civil authorities from every part of the United Kingdom. So far this year, the Ministry of Defence has received 420 military aid to the civil authorities, MACA requests, 341 of which have been COVID-related. The armed forces have provided enormous support whilst themselves taking all appropriate COVID precautions and whilst maintaining our critical defence outputs, ensuring that at all times they are protecting our country, our interests and our friends. At present, support to the government's preparation for the winter period, including the COVID-19 response, is one of Defence's highest priorities. Defence has established a winter support force of approximately 7,500 deployable personnel, in addition to the many Defence medics already embedded within the NHS and the support, when called upon, of our defence scientists in DSTL. Defence is currently supporting 41 MACA tasks, including assistance to the whole town testing pilot in Liverpool and the Birmingham City Council drop and collect scheme. Personnel have previously supported activities from the Nightingale facility construction, vaccine planning, PPE distribution and the staffing of testing centres. They remain ready to undertake further tasks. Defence has made thorough preparations to contribute as requested to civil authorities' responses through the MACA system and will keep the force elements held in readiness to do so under constant review, adjusting the capabilities provided to meet demand. The nation, Mr. Speaker, can be reassured, especially in this week of remembrance, that Defence stands ready, as ever, to support whenever, wherever and however required, and will continue to do so for as long as is necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Monday, ahead of the new national lockdown in England, I said to the Defence Secretary, if he is willing to make further use of the forces this time, the House and the public will back him. The Minister has said 341 MACA requests for help have been in place since mid-March. What people want to know now is what's the plan. They have a right to know, and they have a right to regular ministerial reporting of such decisions, which will also help to build better public understanding and support for our military. From Friday, 2,000 troops have been deployed in Liverpool, double the number we have posted in Afghanistan. Mayor Joe Anderson told me last night, we're delighted to have them for their sheer numbers and their logistical expertise. He said they'd set up 17 centres and done 23,170 tests in just 72 hours. Is the MOD willing to agree similar MACA support for other local authority areas? Mr. Speaker, the citywide testing, of course, is to find people with COVID who are infectious but asymptomatic and then ensure they isolate and don't infect others. This requires regular, routine and continuing testing. How sustainable is this deployment? When will the 2,000 troops start to be withdrawn? How scalable is this deployment? Which other cities and towns will also benefit? The Minister said 7,500 troops are already on standby as part of what he called the Winter Support Force. Our adversaries, Mr. Speaker, will watch the extent to which our forces are focused on COVID. Can the Minister therefore confirm that this has had no impact so far on forces' training, standing commitments or capabilities to respond to conflicts and threats? And finally, Mr. Speaker, the government has raised the whole country's hopes with the news of the Pfizer vaccine, but it is vaccinations, not vaccines, that will protect people from the virus. And getting this vaccine to the point of vaccination requires storing and transporting it at minus 70 degrees. How is the military involved in planning for nationwide vaccination? Will the military be involved in its delivery? How soon will this start? If the government do now make more use of our armed forces to help fight COVID, this will indeed be widely welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I may start with the warm words of support the Right Honourable Gentleman provides to the wider tasks of the armed forces, which I very much welcome. And I can absolutely assure the Right Honourable Gentleman and this House that all essential defence tasks have been continued to operate with great professionalism and great resolve by our armed forces, be that CASD, be it QRA, be it our army deployments around the world. Clearly, we've had to take precautions, we've had to keep our troops safe, we've had to ensure that they can continue to operate. Those precautions have been put in place, but they have continued to meet the needs. Early on, we had to pause training. That's now gathered momentum again, and I'm pleased to say that we are seeing an increase in the number of people applying to join our armed forces, I think inspired by the work that they are doing in all our communities. The Right Honourable Gentleman raised other points. What's the plan? We stand ready to support other parts of government. We work in partnership with other parts of government as the Department of Health and the devolved governments require our support. We are there to provide and to assist support. In Liverpool, I'm so pleased that he spoke to the Mayor yesterday. I hear constantly the great teamwork between Liverpool City Council and the local NHS and our forces who are assisting them in this process. It is a pilot. I think we're now actually at 18 test centres with a large number continuing to be supplied as we work with the City Council. But it is a pilot. We need to see what we can learn from this pilot, and we need to test its effectiveness. It's been so far so good. It is scalable, but as part of this programme, we're also talking to civilian agencies and to the Council and to the NHS about how others could step in, as so often, as in the case of MTUs, the armed forces lead the way, but others may well come through if this becomes something that the Department of Health and others believe this should be deployed more widely across the country.
So Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, a long time since I served in the armed forces, but the one lesson I did take from it is that headquarters command and control is absolutely vital when going through an operation. And I note when I look at what's happening on test and trace that there are now 4 centres, the Joint Biocentre DASHSC, the National COVID Response Centre, COVID Task Force at the Cabinet Office, COVID Data Analysis Directorate, each with their own Director General, none of them under a single enforceable chain of command. Given that chain of command at headquarters level is vital and a 3- or 4-star general would be required in a military operation, would you please tell me, has the government at any stage asked the MOD to now implement a chain of command, headquarters command and control for the whole of test and trace to make sure that it's now coordinated and active, and if not, why not?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question. It may be a while since he served in the armed forces, but the Scots Guards loss is certainly our gain in this place, and I thank him for his question. Look, it's not for defence to tell other departments how best to deliver their tasking. We are there to support them, and I'm very proud of the support that we're providing their liaison officers across government, across other government departments, and we have hundreds of people embedded in the local resilience forum. So enabling a network of information and intelligence to be gathered and to enable proper support and tasking to be done on the ground.
Let's head up to Scotland with SNP spokesperson Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and thanks to the Shadow Secretary for tabling the question, and like others, put on record the thanks of the SNP to the armed forces for what they've done in this crisis, not least in my own home city of Glasgow with the Louisa Jordan Hospital. Can I ask the Minister 2 specific things? One is in relation to the 341 requests that he mentions. Can he outline how many of those came from Scotland, and perhaps at a later stage tell us where. And in terms of the vaccination programme that the Shadow Secretary mentions, the Minister will recall at the start of this crisis, when the armed forces were being deployed across the country, it became an ideal opportunity for our adversaries to spread disinformation. That then led to much panic buying in supermarkets and subsequent shortages of food and other items. So can he lay before the House, perhaps not today, but at some point, what the country can expect to see from the armed forces in a future vaccination rollout, so that it doesn't catch us by surprise, and crucially, so that it can't be weaponized against our fellow citizens?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. First of all, I don't know the exact number. I've actually asked, and I will write to the honourable gentleman the exact number split between Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England in terms of MACA requests. I know that we've been very active. In fact, I recall right at the very start of this crisis, when I sadly was personally unwell with the wretched thing and battling a high temperature and other symptoms, getting a call at like 4 o'clock in the morning on a MACA request for a gentleman to be moved from Orkney down to probably the honourable gentleman's constituency. And it made quite an impression on me. Firstly, how lucky I was, all things considered, that gentleman was very, very seriously ill. But secondly, how wonderful we have these professional armed forces able at the drop of a hat to go and deliver and collect and look after people wherever they are in our United Kingdom. I will come back to the honourable gentleman on the specific point regarding the number of MACA requests coming in from Scotland. We are delighted to work with the Scottish Government. On the rollout of the vaccines, I'm not going to speculate on what role there might be for the Ministry of Defence. We clearly work with other government departments in terms of logistical support and planning support. We are there to help, we're there to provide assistance, but it would be far too early. We're still at very early stages, as the Prime Minister was clear yesterday on the vaccines, and it would be inappropriate, I think, to speculate at this stage.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, given that planning for sudden, fast-moving events and surges are part of our military's stock and trade, why haven't they been more involved in planning since the outset, especially when we compare them to all those costly and failing private contractors?
I think the honourable gentleman's aware that the Defence has been involved from the very outset in terms of planning and logistics at a very early stage. Defence is called on, as it is regularly. I mean, we have about 130 MACA requests every year on average over the last few years, and we are well used to working at a local level and national level to work with partners across government. But there's a role for the military, and there's a role that they can pass on. So on the MTUs, for example, the military did a fantastic job in working with our partners in health in order to provide MTUs, but it's appropriate at some stage, when others get up to speed, that we hand over that task in order to be ready to undertake the next role, and the next role in this case includes the whole city pilot in Liverpool.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that NHS Test and Traced is an organisation that has grown from literally zero to an organisation the size of ASDA in little more than 6 months, it would be difficult to imagine an organisation that's grown so quickly that wouldn't be organisationally and challenged. Can I suggest, if the MOD has not been asked for headquarters capability, that the MOD should offer headquarters capability to NHS Test and Trace, which I'm sure would be welcomed with open arms?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe I'm right in saying that we are indeed assisting with NHS Test and Trace and others. So, as required, we do help with logistics and the and planning and support, and we are very, very welcome to. We're very keen to do that. And I think I won't stray into other departments' business, but the sheer scale of the build-out, which my right honourable friend refers to, is obviously the case, and it's also the case we've moved from 2,000 test capability a day to over 500,000 testing capability a day. These are huge challenges that have been undertaken by other departments.
Let's head up to Scotland with Marion Fellows. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Vice Chief of the Defence Staff has said that defence should no longer be considered a last resort option, something formalised in the 2015 Strategic Defence and Security Review, which announced military planners are to be placed in key government departments to give the military a wider and more formal role in supporting national resilience contingency planning. If this is in fact the case, why have the armed forces been deployed in such a limited way throughout this pandemic?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think at the high point we had 7,500 military personnel deployed in support of the civil power. So it's been a large-scale commitment by Defence alongside our other tasks. We stand ready to respond with those numbers or more if required. But the Honourable Lady is right to say that we are always there to plan and to assist and support, but we do so in response to requests. And I know the Honourable Lady would respect that principle. Defence is always here to help. It's always here to be engaged. There's a great trust, I think, from the British nation. Particularly this week, we think of what has gone before. But we always respond at the request of the civil power and to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I ask the Minister to pay particular tribute to the science and the scientists who are working at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory and the important role that they are playing. And can I ask, as we see this increased visibility domestically from our armed forces, is this helping with the important task of recruitment into our armed forces?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there speaks a distinguished former Minister of Defence, and it's a pleasure to see the Honourable Lady in her place. Firstly of all, DSTL, I'm glad that she's raised them on a whole series of tasks, through helping the Welsh Ambulance Service, through to planning regarding a whole range of options that have come through to the military, including how we roll out and our modelling for a whole range of projects during the course of this pandemic. DSTL have done a first-class job, and I'm delighted that she's raised them in this place. On recruitment, absolutely what she expects has come to pass. So I believe we've seen a 13% increase in applications to join the armed forces in the year to July of 2020, and retention is also increased. I think that reflects the pride people have in our armed forces and how they see day in, day out members of the armed forces doing such a valuable task around our country, and they are responding to it in kind.
Heading up to Scotland to Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Greetings from the far north of Scotland, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Chamber that a member of my close family is serving with the armed forces? Thinking of our overseas armed forces personnel, many of them are working in an extremely challenging environment owing to the present pandemic. Can I ask what Her Majesty's Government is doing in terms of PPE and testing for these extremely hard-working people?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and we thank the relative of the Honourable Gentleman for his or her service in the armed forces. In terms of PPE, in terms of making certain precautions, all precautions are being taken. We have good advice from the Department of Health as to what PPE should be deployed. We use that advice. We ensure that we are consistently COVID compliant. In Liverpool at the moment, members of the armed forces helping on that pilot scheme are being regularly tested alongside the residents that they are helping and testing themselves. In terms of overseas deployments, again, we always have a view to our own COVID regulations and to those of the host nations where we are serving, and as a matter of routine, military personnel have a quarantine period before they go out to ensure that they are safe on arrival and on their deployed station.
Dr. Kieran Mellon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There can be no better week than this for all of us to take the time to recognise and thank the armed forces for their contribution. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that in particular the reservists have also been playing an incredibly important role, and join me in thanking for the contribution they're making in our battle against coronavirus?
Absolutely. We are blessed in the armed forces to have reservists with tremendous capabilities who have been able to provide their expertise and professionalism yet again. So I would absolutely like to pay tribute to those reservists who answered the call and came to support us.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I learned earlier on in the pandemic that 4 macro requests had been made from Northern Ireland, 3 of which were satisfied, 1 of which a commercial alternative was found, and I'm pleased that those applications were progressed positively without immature political interference from some members of the Northern Ireland Executive. But can I ask the Minister to confirm whether there has been a recent request on testing on a larger scale in Northern Ireland, and should there be, that MOD would respond positively?
Minister.
I thank the gentleman for his question, and I'm very aware of the support that we have provided to Northern Ireland, and we are always ready to support any area of the United Kingdom that requires our support and assistance, and we are delighted to work together to ensure that we get on top of this dreadful pandemic. Any requests made of the Ministry of Defence will be looked at in the usual manner and looked at in a way we'd look to help, as always.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So much of the military's work is done behind the scenes, and it's been really helpful today to hear how many areas they're already deployed in the fight with the pandemic. But can my honourable friend assure me that the critical tasks for the defence of this nation are not being compromised by all the work that's been done for COVID?
Minister.
I can absolutely give the honourable lady that assurance. The military have a vast range of tasks, not only here at home, but overseas. We have continued to operate throughout this period. Precautions have been put in place. But on key issues like CASD, on the QRA, on our forces overseas, they have continued to maintain their outputs. And importantly, they've been able to continue to train so that we have the confidence that they'll be able to continue to provide those key defence tasks into the future.
Really?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the thanks to the Shadow Secretary of State for the professionalism and help my constituents have received from armed services personnel? We in Liverpool really do appreciate it. The mass testing pilot in Liverpool is due to be reviewed after 10 days to 2 weeks. Does the Minister accept that more time will be needed to meet the objectives of testing everyone? And if so, will he ensure that the pilot remains in place in Liverpool until the end of the national lockdown on the 2nd of December, and that some armed forces personnel remain with us after that time to ensure that a smaller number of mass testing centres can remain open to enable us to keep on top of the virus?
Minister.
I welcome the points made by the honourable lady, and if I may say, we are really enjoying working with Liverpool. It's a tremendous team effort, and I know the armed forces are really proud to be part of that team. Many of them, of course, have been recruited from that area, and they are really enjoying being able to help their own friends, their own families, and the communities that they know so well. On the specifics she asks, it's not really for the Ministry of Defence to decide when is the right time for the pilot to come to a conclusion. We are there to provide support, to provide assistance, and if this needs to go on longer, then that is something that will definitely be looked at. I would have thought be looked at very sympathetically. We want to make certain that there is a successful pilot from which we can take decisions and see whether that can be rolled out more widely. But that's a decision to be taken on the basis of the facts.
Jack the President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by echoing the comments of my honourable friend from Crewe and Nantwich in thanking our reserve forces and paying tribute to them and for everything they're doing to assist the government in this very difficult time. But could I ask the Minister that when reservists are mobilised for this deployment, and whilst reservists are ready to go anywhere at a moment's notice, that consideration is given to the fact that they do need to tidy their affairs up as far as their jobs and their family commitments, and consideration is given for that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable speaks with experience. I think he's a reservist who served in Ob Herrick from memory, indeed. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. What we try and do is do intelligent mobilisation. We try and have an engagement with our reservists to see who's available, who might like to be involved, and particularly those with specialist skills. They invariably say, yes, call us. So we're working with them, and we will always try and give a suitable period of time to enable them to balance family and work commitments. But we are enormously indebted to those who step forward.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Council's Can Day, so I'm sure the Minister would like to join me in thanking local councils for everything they're doing to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. And on that note, could the Minister tell me what conversations he's had with the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government around the support the armed forces will be given in our areas, particularly to ensure that support is coordinated, targeted where needed?
Minister. I thank the Honourable Lady, and yes, I think we're all grateful for the work the councils have done, be it Liverpool City or elsewhere around the country. They've had a huge task to meet. There are hundreds of military advisors deployed through the LRFs, working with the councils and the other local authorities. We will continue to provide that support, I can assure you.
Let us head up to Lichfield to, oh my word, we have got the cathedral in the background, to Michael Fabricant, who's looking rather orange today. Michael Fabricant.
Oh dear, I'm very worried you're saying I'm looking orange, Mr. Speaker. It makes me think of Donald Trump. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I understand my honourable friend wants to be cautious about the vaccine, but the Department of Health have acquired the rights to 6 different vaccines, 350 million doses. One of the vaccines, Pfizer, we heard about yesterday, does need to be transported at under -70 degrees centigrade. Others do not. But whatever happens, it's a huge logistics problem. Can I say to my honourable friend that now's not the time to be shy? Logistics is something the armed forces is very good at. Can I strongly suggest that now is the time he should be suggesting to government and not waiting for government to say to him or other departments to say to him that the armed forces are ready to help in the logistics of the distribution and maybe even the inoculation of these vaccines?
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman is never shy, and the Ministry of Defence is not shy either in being very proud of the capabilities that we do have and that we can deploy. He's absolutely right, that includes logistics and support of that nature, and we are absolutely ready to provide that support as required.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The excellence of our armed forces in civil contingency operations, whether in support, in service or strategic planning, is noted by us all. In York, we have the Medical Services Training Centre, and therefore I want to ask the Minister how that's being deployed at this time to make sure our NHS isn't overwhelmed this winter, and that we're planning now in order to ensure that the support is there when it is needed.
I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. I believe there are 1,600 medics currently deployed embedded within the NHS, and we will do all we can to support them throughout the winter period. Her interest is, I do appreciate her interest. We will continue to provide that support to the NHS in the months ahead.
18 withdrawn, so we go to Scotland with Peter Grant. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week in particular, we all remember with gratitude the price that so many service personnel paid in time of war, and also associate myself with the thanks expressed by other members for the work the armed forces have been doing just now to protect us in the face of such a huge peacetime threat. The armed forces draw their personnel from every community in the United Kingdom, and every citizen in every part of the United Kingdom contributes to the cost through their taxes. So can the Minister tell us what measures are in place to make sure that the deployment of the armed forces just now is based on an assessment of where they can be most effective and where their efforts are most needed?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to reassure the Honourable Gentleman, I don't think we've ever needed to have that kind of discussion, because we receive MACA requests, be they from Scotland or be they from elsewhere, and we judge them on their merits and where we can help, where there's support that can be provided. That is routinely honoured. So it's not a case of having to ration support at the moment. I think I said earlier that 7,500 were deployed actively. I think actually that was the number that were available. I think there's only about 4,000 who were actively deployed on the ground. So we've always got that extra resilience built in, and I can assure the Honourable Gentleman, if requests come in from Scotland or elsewhere, they will always be very sympathetically looked at by the Ministry of Defence.
20 withdrawn, Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I put on record my thanks to the City Mayor's Office, to our Director of Public Health, Matt Ashton, and his staff, and the skilled and expert men and women of the armed forces. This is the first mass testing pilot of its kind, a massive logistical effort in which the military are supporting the people of Liverpool. We warmly welcome our service personnel, and rather than have the likes of Serco plundering public money whilst failing the public, can I actually encourage the Minister? We want a response to COVID-19 that is publicly led by the NHS, by public health professionals and local authorities, and backed up by the logistical expertise of our armed forces where necessary. Thank you, Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman. And can I just re-echo what he said so accurately about the response that has been met on the ground to Armed Forces personnel. They've been really chuffed to see the way that people in Liverpool have responded, and they've been coming in their thousands to be tested, and they're very grateful for the warmth of that support that they're getting, and I thank him for reminding the House of that. And they will be there to support this programme, but there is it's a well-founded MACA tradition. The military often lead. They often find ways of doing things. They will try and pass over to civilian authorities, to Liverpool City Council in the lead, I suspect, working with the Department of Health in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who watched the briefing last night with Brigadier Joe Fossey can't help but be impressed by the professionalism of the Brigadier and his team in Liverpool. What extra capacity remains within the Armed Forces to help other council areas, particularly in the north of England, with my Kirklees council area, 450 cases plus per 100,000 at the moment, to not only help with the mass testing, but also support localised track and trace effectiveness?
Minister.
Thank you. And I recognise the particular issues in Kirklees. I'm glad he's brought it to the House's attention. What we're doing in Liverpool is obviously a pilot. It's a major undertaking. And we'll see the success of that pilot and whether that has got scalability to be passed out elsewhere. That's a matter for the Department of Health and others to opine upon. In terms of helping elsewhere in the country, the military led with MTUs. They were there in the first rank to ensure that testing got up and going, and that has now been passed over, and now I think 620 testing centres around the country. So the Army has stepped back from that, but we stand ready to help in other ways if called upon by other government departments.
Emma Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hull now has the third highest 7-day rate of new cases per 100,000 residents across English upper-tier local authorities. And test and trace, of course, remains a key part of fighting this virus. And I'm incredibly impressed to hear of the pilot that's happened in Liverpool. So does the Minister have plans to deploy armed forces in Hull and the East Riding to help them scale up test and trace?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry to hear those statistics from Hull, which are indeed sobering. But I do repeat what I said earlier to the Honourable Gentleman. There is a particular project at the moment in Liverpool, Hull City, testing pilot. We are there to help and to respond to MACA requests, but a basic principle is that we'll often lead and show the way and help pass on our expertise and our knowledge to civilian contractors. But fundamentally, there comes a point where local authorities and the Department of Health will wish to take on the responsibilities of the COVID challenge from the military once they've actually set up processes and worked to establish first principles.
Sir Desmond Swin.
When the Major Generals removed liberties, Oliver Cromwell wondered publicly if even arming 1 in 10 would be sufficient to enforce it. Will he assure me the armed forces will not be used to enforce any coronavirus regulations?
Minister.
I can reassure the Honourable Gentleman that I know many fine Major Generals. I don't know any that would wish to return to the 1650s. I can also reassure him that there is no way that the armed forces would be used to enforce coronavirus regulations.
We don't come to answer the legal.
And thank you very much. And may I also express thanks on behalf of my constituents for the work that the armed forces have been doing in response to the coronavirus pandemic. He's already revealed to the House that military assistance to civil authority requests have quadrupled this year for understandable reasons. And as we approach the end of the year, with the potential for a vaccine to be deployed, and it has to be said, some of the pressures that will be placed upon the country as a result of Brexit, is he confident that all future military assistance to civil authority requests are going to be able to be met because he has the appropriate capacity?
Minister.
To reassure the Honourable Lady, and first of all, I do wish her constituents well in a difficult time, and I'm glad that the military is being well received in her constituency. We are looking at how we scale up. We are always in a process of planning to see how we can get the extra resources if required and if called upon. So I've got a great deal of confidence we will be able to continue to meet the MACA requests as the Honourable Lady requested.
Following on that question, there's no point in repeating what's been said many times this afternoon, that the armed forces act with superb professionalism. But the moment this crisis is over, we can be assured, judging by history, that the bean counters in the Treasury will be putting pressure on the MOD for further cuts. We saw it after the end of the Cold War, the Afghanistan War, and this will carry on. So will the Minister give me an assurance today that both he and the Secretary of State will vigorously resist, with the help of Number 10, any further cuts in our armed forces?
Mr. Speaker, I feel I ought to declare my interest that I did once serve in the Treasury, but I'd like to put that on record. I can absolutely reassure a right honourable gentleman that decisions made on resources for the armed forces through the integrated review are made on the basis of threat. That is what is core to the work that we are undertaking, and I hope that he will take that reassurance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for the statement and also put on record my thanks to the Army for their personnel and what they do across my constituency and elsewhere. The British Army and PA detachments in Northern Ireland are drawn from both sides of the community, from both Roman Catholic and Protestant, from nationalist and from unionist. They both serve in the same uniform. I just want to ask the Minister, will the opportunity for the British Army to assist if they're called upon by the Northern Ireland Army will happen? And can the Minister also assure this House that no soldier will be asked to go anywhere without the appropriate PPE and training to deal with people in these very difficult and very different days? Thank you.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that all deployed personnel get the right PPE and take the right COVID precautions. I warmly welcome what he says about how the armed forces represent the whole of our great nation, right the way across the board, and we are proud that that is the case, and we're always working to assure that that is the case, and we'll always stand ready to listen to any MACA requests that come in and look at those always sympathetically if we can.
Caroline Nancy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I should declare an interest as a very proud patron of the Military Preparation College, which has an Eastbourne campus. And I'm delighted to be able to tell my honourable friend that there has been a significant increase in application to the college, so inspired our young people by what they've seen in our town of military service, not least in May, when military personnel set up a mobile temporary site which enabled essential workers to very rapidly be tested, and so our hospice, our hospital, our care homes, all were able to continue. Would he join me in thanking military personnel who served in Sussex?
Well, I also got to declare an interest because I am a Sussex Member of Parliament, and they've done a terrific job, including, I record, in May with the mobile testing unit. And I'm delighted to confirm what the Honourable Lady says relating to increased interest in the armed forces. As I say, recruitment is well up this year, as is retention, and I'm delighted to see both.
Let's head up to Scotland with Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I put on the record my gratitude for the work that the armed forces are doing in combating this global pandemic. It does seem that there are other countries which may be better organised in emergency management. So what lessons have been learnt by the UK government from how other countries have been handling the crisis?
Minister.
I thank the gentleman for the question. I think we always look at what other people do and how other people respond, but I think there's been a great well of support, as indeed came from the honourable gentleman, for the work done by the armed forces, how they've responded to requests that have come in, and how they've continued to assist other government departments in ensuring that we get the very, very best response in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I put on record the fact that this response to the pandemic has demonstrated the United Kingdom at its best. My local regiment, the 1st Battalion, the Rifles, helped the Welsh ambulance service with testing, and the Royal Welsh helped in Gloucester with the testing facility there, which I had the opportunity to visit. Can I just probe the Minister a little further on the question that the Shadow Secretary had and other members have had about the vaccine situation? I think the Minister said that the MOD stood ready to help. Can I ask if he's had any requests from civilian authorities to assist with vaccine rollout, and if so, what those plans are?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is that there is work being done in terms of planning, in terms of logistics, in terms of how you would support the important role on a vaccine. But I really would counsel that this is still very, very early days on the vaccine, as the Prime Minister made clear yesterday. So we are ready to assist on logistics and planning and thoughts and preparations and logistics, but this is early days still.
Joe the Select Committee, Tobias Hutworth.
Thank you very much,
Mr. Speaker, grateful to catch your eye. I hope the message is loud and clear that the Minister hears today. We are absolutely proud of what our armed forces do, but given their vast experience in emergency planning, in crisis management, and indeed in strategic thinking, they are a vastly underused asset, given this is the biggest crisis we've seen since the Second World War. What we face today, we have logistical challenges, command and control challenges, communications challenges, operational challenges. These are all things the armed forces can do, and yet there is not a place for them at the Quad, the top decision-making body dealing with this pandemic. Does my right honourable friend not think that's incorrect?
Minister.
I welcome what my honourable friend says in terms of the support that is provided by the armed forces. He's absolutely right. We have a vast array of areas where we can support and provide assistance to other government departments. But as he's very, very well aware that the process is that it's the civil authority that comes to us to request assistance, and we always stand ready to receive those reports.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, spending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Colin, are you ready?
Yes. Sorry.
Yep. Order! I call the Secretary of State for Health, Secretary of State Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to make a statement on coronavirus. The virus remains a powerful adversary, but we're marshalling the forces of science and human ingenuity, and these forces are growing stronger, and I have no doubt in time that we will prevail. The latest figures show that the number of cases continues to rise, so we must all play our part to get it under control. As I've said from many times at this dispatch box, Mr. Speaker, our strategy is to suppress the virus, supporting education, the economy and the NHS until a vaccine can be deployed. Mr. Speaker, that is our plan, and with the resolve that we must all show, we can see that that plan is working. Before turning to progress on testing and on vaccines, I first want to update the House on our response to the new variant strain of coronavirus that has been identified in Denmark. This shows how vigilant we must be. We've been monitoring the spread of coronavirus in European mink farms for some time, especially the major countries for mink farming like Denmark, Spain, Poland and the Netherlands. Spain has already announced the destruction of its farmed mink population in April. On Thursday evening last, I was alerted to a significant development in Denmark of a new evidence that the virus had spread back from mink to humans in a variant form that did not fully respond to COVID-19 antibodies. Although the chance of this variant becoming widespread is low, the consequences, should that happen, would be grave. So working with my right honourable friends, the Home Secretary and the Transport Secretary, and all the devolved administrations, we removed the travel corridor for travel from Denmark in the early hours of Friday morning. On Saturday and over the weekend, following further clinical analysis, we introduced a full ban on all international travel from Denmark. British nationals or residents who are returning from Denmark, whether directly or indirectly, can still travel here, but must fully self-isolate, along with all other members of their household, until 2 weeks since they were in Denmark. I know these are serious steps, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the consequences for people, but I think the whole House will understand why we had to act so quickly and decisively. Be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, we will do what needs to be done to protect this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, we do not resile from our duty to protect, and to suppress the virus, we must harness new technology to keep people safe and in time to liberate. Our ability to suppress the virus begins with testing for it. And the House will know that we've been driving forward testing capacity based on new technologies and old. Yesterday, our PCR testing capacity stood at 517,957, the largest testing capacity in Europe. Over 10 million people in the UK have now been tested at least once through NHS Test and Trace. And our NHS COVID-19 contact tracing app is now approaching 20 million downloads. And yet, this historic expansion is just one part of our critical national infrastructure for testing. Just as we drive testing capacity on the existing technology, so too we've invested in the development of the new. Now, I've been criticised with this obsession for new testing capacity, but we have not wavered from the task, and now we're seeing the fruits of this effort. Last week, we expanded the pilot in Stoke-on-Trent to Liverpool, where we've deployed enough of the cutting-edge lateral flow tests to offer tests to the whole city. These tests can deliver a result on your infectiousness in under 15 minutes, so people can get an almost immediate reassurance about their condition, so we can find and isolate the positives and reassure the negatives. To make this happen, NHS Test and Trace has been working side by side with the logistical heft of our armed services and Liverpool City Council. And I want to thank Mayor Joe Anderson and his whole team for their work. Next, these tests allow us, from today, to begin rolling out twice-weekly testing for all NHS staff, which will help keep people safe when they go into hospital and help keep my wonderful colleagues in the NHS safe too. Now, the next step is to roll out this mass testing capability more widely. So I can tell the House that last night I wrote to 67 directors of public health who've expressed an interest in making 10,000 tests available immediately and making available lateral flow tests for use by local officials according to local needs at a rate of 10% of their population per week. That same capacity, 10% of the population per week, will be made available to the devolved administrations too. And by combining the local knowledge of public health leaders with our extensive national infrastructure, we can tackle this virus in our communities and help our efforts to bring the R down. Testing provides confidence, and it's this confidence that will help get Britain back on her feet once more. Finally, Mr. Speaker, while we expand testing to find the virus, the best way to liberate and to get life closer to normal is a vaccine. And I can report to the House the news of the first phase 3 trial results of any vaccine anywhere in the world. After tests on 43,000 volunteers, of whom half got the vaccine and half got a placebo, interim results suggest it's proving 90% effective at protecting people against the virus. This is promising news. We in the UK are among the first to identify the promise shown by the vaccine, and we secured an order of 40 million doses. This puts us towards the front of the international pack. And we've placed orders for 300 million further doses from 5 other vaccine candidates which are yet to report their phase 3 results, including, of course, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. I just want to be clear to the House. We do not have a vaccine yet, but we are one step closer. There are many steps still to take. The full safety data is not yet available, and our strong and independent regulator, the MHRA, will not approve a vaccine until it is clinically safe. And until it's rolled out, we won't know how long the effect lasts for, or its impact not just on keeping people safe, but also on reducing transmission. As Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam said yesterday, it's like the first goal scored in a penalty shootout. You haven't won the cup yet, but it tells you that the goalkeeper can be beaten. And beat this virus we must, we can, and we will. Yesterday's announcement marks an important step in the battle against COVID-19. But as the Prime Minister said, we must not slacken our resolve, and there are no guarantees. And so it's critical that people continue to abide by the rules and that we all work together to get the R number below 1. Mr. Speaker, if this or any other vaccine is approved, we will be ready to begin a large-scale vaccination programme. First, to priority groups, as recommended by the Independent Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, before rolling it out more widely. Our plans for deployment of a COVID vaccine are built on tried and tested plans for a flu vaccine, which we of course deploy every autumn. We do not yet know whether or when a vaccine is approved, but I have tasked the NHS with being ready from any date from the 1st of December. The logistics are complex, the uncertainties are real, and the scale of the job is vast. But I know that the NHS, brilliantly assisted by the armed services, will be up to the task. I can tell the House that last night we wrote to GPs setting out £150 million of immediate support and setting out what we need of them, working alongside hospitals and pharmacies in preparing for deployment. The deployment of the vaccine will involve working long days and weekends, and it comes on top of all the NHS has already done for us this year. And I want to thank in advance my NHS colleagues for the work that this will entail. I know that they will rise to this challenge of being ready, when the science comes good, to inject hope into millions of arms this winter. Mr. Speaker, the course of human history is marked by advances where our collective ingenuity helps us vanquish the most deadly threats. Coronavirus is a disease that strikes at what it is to be human, at the social bonds that unite us. So we must come together as one to defeat this latest threat to humanity. There are many hard days ahead, many hurdles to overcome, but our plan is working, and I'm more sure than ever that we will prevail together.
Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and as always, I thank the Secretary of State for advanced sight of his statement. And may I just take this opportunity to congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. I'm sure the whole House looks forward to close international cooperation to defeat this virus. Can I welcome the announcement in the last 24 hours of routine testing for frontline NHS staff. He will know that this is something that I and indeed the chair of the Select Committee have been pushing for some months now, and it's welcome that we're now in a position to extend that testing. It is important not just to protect our NHS staff, and I join with him in thanking them, but it's also important for infection control in healthcare settings as well. On the rollout of the lateral flow test that he has announced today, I understand that he's giving discretion to directors of public health, but does he agree that relatives of care home residents should be given priority access to these tests so they can go into the care home, see their loved ones, and even maybe hold their hand or hug them? Now, testing is only one part of the jigsaw, of course, so to avoid this lockdown becoming a letdown, we need to put contact tracing in the hands of public health teams from day one. So can he update the House on how he is fixing contact tracing? And Dido Harding, he may have seen at this relevant Select Committee just now, has confirmed that when it comes to isolation, that people find it very difficult. The need to keep earning and feed your family is fundamental. So will he now accept that a better package of financial support is needed to ensure that isolation is adhered to? Now, on the vaccine, Mr. Speaker, this is indeed a moment of great hope in a bleak, dismal year that has shattered so many families. We are optimistic, though cautious, quite rightly. We need to see the full results, the demographic details of the trials, and understand the implications for severe cases. There will be clinical judgments by the relevant committee around the priority lists, which we all understand. But could he outline the latest clinical thinking around vaccination of children? And will the disproportionate impact of the virus on minority ethnic communities be taken into account by the relevant clinicians when drawing up the final priority list? What is the government's current working assumption of the proportion of the population that needs to be vaccinated to establish herd immunity and bring R below 1? And over what time frame does he envisage that happening? And how many doses does he think we will need? Now, as we vaccinate the most vulnerable, there will be less people at risks, and deaths and infections will come down. But the virus is now endemic. So is it the government's current working assumption that social distancing and mask wearing will need to continue until that herd immunity is reached? Now, fundamentally, for this to work, we need a plan for the manufacture and distribution of that vaccine. And can I gently suggest to the Secretary of State that the rollout of test and trace and the early procurement of PPE wasn't as smooth as it might otherwise have been? Now, none of us as constituency MPs want to see booking systems overloaded and our constituents told to travel hundreds of miles for a jab like we saw earlier this year with testing. So what is the plan? Will he publish a strategy, and can he tell us how much will be invested in the COVID vaccination programme? We need secure supply chains. So is the government working internationally to ensure there is enough raw materials, enzymes, bioreactors to guarantee the mass manufacturing that is needed? On distribution, the Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept at minus 70 degrees centigrade. Cold chain transport and storage is needed. Now, a year ago, he used to boast that he was the country's biggest purchaser of fridges. So is he procuring the appropriate storage equipment now? Would liquid nitrogen and freezers be provided to health centres, to doctors' practices and care homes? And will cold chain distribution be in place in all parts of the country? Mr. Speaker, last year the World Health Organization described vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 threats to global health. So can I again reiterate my offer to work with him on a cross-party basis to build public confidence in the vaccine, promote take-up and dispel anti-vax myths? And indeed, I rather suspect if all members working across the House to promote take-up would probably prove more cost-effective than paying £670,000 of taxpayers' money to fancy PR consultants. Mr. Speaker, this is indeed an important moment. We see a glimmer of light in the distance at the end of this long, dark tunnel. Our constituents are hopeful, so we look forward to rapid progress in the distribution of this vaccine so we can all get back to normal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the honourable member for his questions and the approach that he is rightly taking. Like him, I'm delighted that we're able to roll out routine testing to NHS staff, and that starts today, and I'm grateful to him for his support and indeed the support of the urging of the chair of the Select Committee. On contact tracing, we of course continue to work on the constant improvement needed on contact tracing, but as he's said, the expansion of testing in a radical way because of the new technology that we've invested in and spent months working on means that we will now be able to find more of the primary cases, more of the people who've got the disease, and then are able to get them and their contacts to isolate, because the single most important challenge is finding the people who have the vaccine, the virus in the first place. He mentioned children. This vaccine, on the vaccine, this vaccine will not be used for children. It hasn't been tested on children, and the reason is that the likelihood of children having significant detriment if they catch COVID-19 is very, very low. So this is an adult vaccine for the adult population. He asked about the JCVI prioritisation. It is really important that we prioritise according to clinical risk, and the JCVI have absolutely looked into all of the risk factors, including ethnicity as one of the risk factors. They have concluded that age and if you work in health and social care are the two prime risk factors that far outweigh any other, and so they are the primary risk factors that that cascade into the draft interim prioritisation that they published on the 25th of September, which of course will be updated as they get the final data that comes through from the clinical trials. The opposition spokesman asked about the proportion of the population needing vaccinating. Now, the honest truth to that question is we don't know what proportion of the population vaccination needs to reach in order for this to stop the epidemic. And the reason we don't know that is that you can check in a clinical trial for the impact of the vaccine on protecting the individual. 43,000 individuals, half of whom have had the vaccine. What you cannot check is the impact on the transmission of the disease by those people, because you have to have enough of the population, a significant proportion of the population, to have had the vaccine to understand that. This is the difference between a so-called disease-modifying vaccine, which is testing how much it affects the disease an individual suffers if they get COVID-19, versus an epidemic-modifying vaccine, which is the impact on the spread and the transmission of the disease. And you can't know that until after it's been rolled out, and so we will monitor it very closely. Finally, he asked questions about the manufacture, which of course is important. On this vaccine, that is a matter for Pfizer. It is a difficult process. And also the distribution, which is a huge challenge, being led by the NHS, as I say. The cold chain requirements, because this vaccine has to be at -70 for until the final hours, the cold chain requirements are significant and do add to the logistical complications. But we have known about that cold chain requirement for many months now, so it's been part of our planning for some time. And so we have a good degree of confidence that that will be in place. And finally, he asked about international collaboration. I'm absolutely delighted that the UK has been a leader in the efforts for international collaboration to find a vaccine, putting more money in than any other nation, coordinating and bringing together scientists and vaccine specialists, and also using our aid budget to ensure that people around the world get the vaccine, in countries which wouldn't be able to afford to vaccinate their own population in some cases. So we are a big part of the international work here, and I very much look forward to working with colleagues in the United States and everywhere else around the world on making sure that we can have a global vaccination programme as soon as a safe and effective set of vaccines can be made available.
Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate warmly the Health Secretary on securing access to the new vaccine? Choosing which vaccine to back must be a bit like playing roulette, and to secure 40 million doses of the very first vaccine to prove efficacious is an enormous achievement for the country, and he deserves great credit for that. And I also want to thank him for bringing forward the introduction of weekly testing of NHS staff to the end of next week, which will reassure our very, very hard-working frontline staff that they are not infecting their own patients, which is, of course, one of their primary worries. The biggest issue we face now is the fact that only around a fifth of the people that we ask to isolate are actually complying. And of course, we don't even know all the people that we would like to ask to isolate in the first place. I just wonder what he thinks of Sir John Bell's suggestion to the Select Committee this morning that instead of asking people to isolate, we should give them 48-hour lateral flow tests and then only ask them to isolate if they're positive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He's very generous with his words. I'd also direct his warm words of gratitude to the Vaccines Task Force, who've done so much work on making sure that we can procure these and secure the supplies of these vaccines, should they prove safe as well as efficacious. On the question that he asked about Sir John Bell's comments, what I'd say is that that option of testing people regularly, not if they're the primary case, not if they have the virus, but if they are contacts, that option wouldn't even be open to us had we not secured the huge capacity for lateral flow testing that we now have in this country. It's something on which I very much look to the clinicians for advice. Sir John Bell is a highly respected clinician and expert in this area, and it's something that I'm sure everybody will want to look at closely.
Let's head up to Scotland to the SNP spokesperson, Dr. Philippa Whitford. Dr. Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With 3.5 weeks left of the current lockdown in England, what does the Secretary of State plan to change so COVID-19 doesn't just get out of control again when restrictions are eased? He mentions the pilot project of population testing in Liverpool using newly developed lateral flow tests. But there isn't yet published sensitivity or specificity data for these tests. So what's the risk of false negative or false positive results? And has the UK National Screening Committee been involved to help assess the risks, benefits and costs of such mass population testing? I welcome the progress made on the Pfizer vaccine, but it will take time before it's widely available. And as he said earlier, we don't yet know if it will reduce transmission, so it doesn't remove the need to control viral spread using current measures. While I also welcome the expansion of PCR testing, I'm sure he recognises that it's not just the number of tests available that matters, but that testing is part of a test, trace, isolate and support system to be effective. 5 months on, Serco are still struggling to reach even 60% of contacts. So will he copy the more successful approach of the devolved nations and fund local public health teams so they can lead contact tracing in their area? An effective test and trace system can identify those carrying the virus rather than isolating everyone in a lockdown. But it's isolation which actually breaks the chains of infection. So is he concerned that so few people are isolating when they should? And how does he think that can be improved? People won't stay off work if it means they can't feed their family. So how will he make access to the government's isolation payment easier?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we're working to ensure that by all of us working together and making sacrifices, we can come out of this lockdown into the tiered approach that we had in place beforehand. That is the goal, and the more that people follow these rules during the lockdown, the more effective that will be. And we obviously monitor the data very closely on that. She asked about the lateral flow tests and their sensitivity and specificity. Of course this is assessed. It's an incredibly important question. And the assessment of these tests that we're using in Liverpool and now rolling out elsewhere was made at Porton Down. And then in the field, we tested 5,000 of the lateral flow tests alongside 5,000 PCR tests of the same people, and have a high degree of confidence that they can find people who are infectious. And in fact, they have a lower false positivity issue than the PCR tests. So they are very effective for the right use cases, including mass population testing. She asked about isolation. Of course, isolation is important. I would just mention to the Honourable Lady that right across the UK we have test and trace systems in place. There is a difference in how a successful contact is measured, it turns out. In England, we are much stricter on requiring a contact to be confirmed contact with somebody rather than just sending them a message. That doesn't count as contact in the English system. It does count as contact in some of the devolved and local systems. So it's just really important that we actually measure the same thing rather than trying to make divisions where divisions don't exist. And finally, on the point about isolation, of course, it's vital that people isolate when they test positive or when they're asked to by NHS Test and Trace. I would just gently again say that the 20% figure is not particularly robust, because it implies that 80% of people aren't doing anything to isolate. That isn't actually what that survey found, but nevertheless, we all should be urging people and requiring people to follow the rules. When they test positive, you must isolate. When you are in contact, you must isolate. That is part of your social duty.
Damien Green. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is indeed a relief to have some hope introduced into our discussions about COVID. And I'm glad that the Secretary of State has announced that the use of the rapid result lateral flow tests will be expanded to new geographical areas. But will he consider, as this rollout continues, offering these tests to specific groups, perhaps particularly close relatives of care home residents who are desperate to be able to make regular visits?
So, of course. I've seen some of the heart-rending stories, and I've met people who are affected by their inability to see their relatives in care homes. The lateral flow test that we're sending out to directors of public health, they can use for use cases they think are important locally, so they can use them for this purpose if they so choose. But we're also looking at a broader solution to this problem, which is a conundrum we've discussed many times in this House, that we need to keep people in care homes safe, but at the same time, of course, we want to allow as much visiting as can be safe, which itself directly impacts on the health of many residents.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it would be very helpful to know how long the rollout of the vaccinations will take once the Secretary of State gets the go-ahead. But what he's outlined, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a major government project that doesn't stop with the first vaccination, and with the mutations rife in Denmark and elsewhere, it could affect children in future. So as part of his major project planning, how is he going to make sure that we can logistically get this out through the entire population if that does sadly become necessary?
Yes, it's a very, very good question from the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee. I would expect nothing less. The critical question is, the critical answer to how long this takes is it depends on the speed of manufacture in the first instance. My goal, and the goal I've set the NHS, is to be able to roll this out as quickly as it can be manufactured. And that manufacturing schedule is itself uncertain because this is really hard stuff to make. We have got the Major Projects Authority in the government. It involved in many of the projects that were built up in the department over the past 9 months, because I respect their views and their ability to kick the tyres. This is a huge endeavour, the rollout of the vaccine, but it builds on the annual rollout of the flu vaccine. It's just bigger and over a shorter period, and needs to be done faster.
Mark Posey.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the past few months have been a rollercoaster ride for families, businesses and public services as they've tried to make plans for the future. Now, the Secretary of State has rightly spoken of the need for caution about the rollout of a vaccine, but I think what my constituents would like to hear from him, if he's able to say, is when can they safely start to consider family events and holidays, and when will businesses be able to get back to something like business as usual?
I understand the yearning for this certainty. All I can say to my honourable friend in honesty is that I want us to get back to normal as quickly as possible, and yesterday's news is a big step forward, but it isn't the only step. There are more steps that are needed. The scientists are now offering views on that sort of timetable, but the government's view is that we must make this happen as quickly as possible and to be ready to roll out as fast as this any safe vaccine can be manufactured. But we will not put safety at risk. That is a lodestar of the programme, and therefore we've got to await the clinical safety sign-off before we can take this to the next stage.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We know that those in the most deprived areas are around twice as likely to die from COVID-19, and those in the least deprived areas. We also know that the most deprived people in society are less likely to take up a vaccine and health services. So can the Secretary of State tell me what plans he has made to ensure a high take-up of any COVID-19 vaccine amongst the most deprived, and if he will consider setting an inequalities target for this?
Well, we are, of course, concerned about this, and will put in enormous efforts to try to ensure that the take-up of the vaccine is as equal as possible. The first starting principle is that we will roll out the vaccine according to clinical need across the whole of the UK, across all 4 nations, working, of course, through the devolved NHSs, which are going to be critical to actually delivering the vaccine in the devolved nations. But this is a UK programme. The procurement of this vaccine, we've been working very closely together, and in terms of the rollout amongst deprived communities and amongst harder to reach communities, we have particular emphasis on trying to make sure that we get as equal a rollout as possible. The starting point must be clinical need.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Not a day goes by when I don't hear from or try and help a constituent to see a loved one in a care home. And in so many cases, we know that people haven't been able to see their loved ones for months and months. Given I'm the MP for one of the oldest constituents in the country, North Norfolk, can you give me my absolute reassurance that we will have enough vaccinations to support not only the vulnerable in my care homes, but also those amazing workers that have done so much over the pandemic?
Well, Mr Speaker, precisely because of the reasons that my honourable friend sets out, the top priority, according to the clinical analysis, for this vaccine is the residents of care homes and the staff who work to look after them so well. They are in the very first categorisation because they're the most vulnerable to this disease, and because living in a care home, because of its nature as a generally communal environment, means that they're particularly susceptible. And representing the oldest constituency, as I understand it, in the country, Mr Speaker, that sort of prioritisation will mean, I'm sure, that should this come off, and if the other hurdles are passed, then there'll be a lot of vaccine heading to North Norfolk.
Munira Wilson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, of course the news about the Pfizer vaccine is extremely encouraging, and we're all hopeful that it's proved safe and effective and approved by regulators. If that is indeed the case, given that it's being manufactured in Belgium, and as he has noted, it has to be kept at -70 degrees at all times until shortly before administration, what
arrangements is he putting in place to ensure that there is absolutely no delay of the supplies at the borders following the end of the Brexit transition period? Because any significant delay could, at worst, result in precious supplies being damaged and rendered useless, which could delay rollout.
Exactly. We are, of course, we've looked at this risk, and I have confidence in our plans to be able to deliver the vaccine, whatever the outcomes of the negotiations over our future relationship with Europe.
Jenkin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend's plan, he keeps reporting to the House, our strategy is to suppress the virus until a vaccine can be deployed. But this is still beset by so many uncertainties. Who would have thought that mink in Denmark could throw a spanner into this situation? And isn't the tracing capability and the ability to get people to isolate absolutely crucial? And who should be held accountable for whether that is operationally effective as we come out of lockdown? Because that's the only time we've got to make this work. Otherwise we'll be in another lockdown.
Well, of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is very important that we continue to build and strengthen the contact tracing system as we are doing. And my right honourable friend mentions the uncertainties and the issue around the virus that has spread back from mink to humans is one example of that. Of course, managing a pandemic is beset by uncertainty. We still have uncertainty, for instance, over whether even the Pfizer vaccine will pass the safety hurdles that we very much hope that it will in the coming weeks. But managing through that uncertainty is an absolutely critical part of getting this right.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I can thank the Secretary of State for his statement today in the House. And isn't it good, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to see the nation regain at least a smile in relation to the potential of a vaccine, and that's got to be good news for us all. Will the Secretary of State outline how he intends to ensure that, unlike the flu vaccine shortage that the nation is at presently operating, and my own constituency for one, that each region will receive the necessary amount, and that rather than estimations that the health service will allocate on priority need and not on postcode?
Yes, absolutely. This is a UK programme. I've been working closely with my Northern Ireland counterpart, Robin Swan, who's doing a brilliant job in Northern Ireland to make sure that we get this rollout as effective as possible right across the whole United Kingdom.
Andrew Ledson.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, happy birthday today. I know my right honourable friend is as concerned as I am about the impact of lockdown, particularly the first lockdown, on those new families with new babies, and in particular as seen from the excellent Parent Infant Foundation report on babies in lockdown and the awful news from Ofsted that some babies have been harmed more than you would expect during that period of time, potentially as a result of poor mental health and so on. So can my right honourable friend tell us what exactly he is doing to make sure that during this current lockdown, new families are being provided with the right level of support from partners and from statutory services that they need to help them through?
My right honourable friend is right to raise this issue, and we all know how close it is to her heart. In the first lockdown, many NHS services were suspended, partly because of the uncertainty that we've just been talking about. We know far more both about the virus and about how to manage it second time round, and our goal is that all NHS services stay open. Now, that is not that hasn't proved possible in the areas of the country where there is the highest prevalence, but all maternity services and services around perinatal health ought to stay open everywhere. We have had to delay some non-cancer, non-urgent treatment, but crucially, the best thing to do for this agenda that she champions is to try to keep the virus under control and try to suppress the virus as much as possible.
Sana Begum.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and happy birthday from me too. As well as age and underlying conditions, the JCVI notes that early signals have been identified of other potential risk factors, including deprivation and ethnicity. But there has been numerous amounts of research and evidence showing that Black, Asian and minority groups are at risk of this virus. Given the occupations, given the overcrowded households that they disproportionately represent, why have they not been included in the composition and order of priority of groups for vaccination?
Thank you very much. And before I forget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I should say happy birthday to you as well. Happy birthday. The Honourable Lady asks a very important question. The JCVI have looked at this issue, and in their earlier iteration of their draft advice, they considered the question of the disproportionate impact that this virus has had on BAME communities. Their conclusion, having looked at it in some detail, is that the overwhelming indicator of mortality from coronavirus is age, and therefore they've based their recommendations around age and, of course, the occupation groups who directly support the most vulnerable. Hence, they've come up with the classification that they have, and I respect their independence and their analysis.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and a happy birthday to you as well. In the past fortnight, 75 people in my constituency, workers at a food processing factory, have been tested positive. And this follows a similar outbreak at Cranswick Country Foods, where 144 out of 333 were tested positive just 10 days ago. Lawrence Young at the University of Warwick has shown through research that the virus remains very viable on cold surfaces. My question is very simple to the Secretary of State. How often should the Health and Safety Executive be undertaking physical checks in these sorts of premises? And when should members of Parliament be notified by local authorities such an outbreak has happened?
Well, it is down to the local authority in the first instance to notify a Member of Parliament, although we often in the department, if an issue is very significant, we'll also work with the local Member of Parliament. The Health and Safety Executive takes a risk-based approach, so it's not possible to give a definitive answer about how often they should visit, because it depends on the level of the risk.
Before I call Jacob, I'd just like to say thanks for all the birthday wishes. I absolve anybody else from saying happy birthday to me. I am coming to terms with the fact that the Times newspaper added a year onto my age. It's bad enough being the age I am, I do assure you, but nonetheless. Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week I spoke to care providers in Redcar and Cleveland who outlined that when it comes to testing in care homes, there are still two groups of people who are missed out. First of all, agency workers who go to and from care home to care home currently fall outside of the weekly testing programme. And secondly, the family members of those who live in care homes who, if we can roll out testing for these people, can be treated as care workers and able to visit their loved ones once again. So can the Secretary of State urgently address these two gaps in our testing programme to help lift some hardship on the most vulnerable in our society?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the answer is yes, and I'll add a third, which is visitors to care homes, where I'd like to see a testing regime be able to work to make visiting easier. When it comes to agency workers, we want to stop people from working in more than one care home, because that is a risk of transmission, and we want to stop that altogether. When it comes to carers who are unpaid but who go in regularly, we want to find a way for them to be added to the regular testing regime.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is nothing in the Secretary of State's statement today about VAT on PPE. So could he update the House on what discussions he's had with the Treasury about scrapping the mask tax?
Well, that's a matter for the Treasury, as she indicated. The truth is that we have made PPE freely available to health and social care and other public services until the end of this financial year.
David Davis.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the weekend press carried briefing of a government intention to distribute vitamin D to care homes and other vulnerable groups. If this is true, I congratulate the Secretary of State on a decisive move on a low-cost, zero-risk, potentially highly effective action. If true, can you tell us the dosages being proposed, how quickly it'll happen, whether it will include ethnic minorities in the target groups, and is his department reviewing and considering the Spanish trials with a view to hospital use of calcifediol in a clinical context?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is something that we're working hard on in the department. I'm not yet in a position to be able to answer all of those questions, except to say that I have looked at the results of the Spanish trial that he mentioned, not least because my right honourable friend sent me those results with some enthusiasm, and we are looking at this very closely.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Before I ask my question, I'd like to pay tribute to the brave staff from the Royal Free in my constituency who featured in the programme Hospital last night on BBC Two for all their hard work during the pandemic. I understand that when the vaccine is approved, the government will distribute it according to who needs it most. But before that point, will there be government restrictions between those who have been vaccinated and those who haven't been vaccinated? And could I ask the Secretary of State when he thinks the vaccination will be available for the whole of the UK?
May the Honourable Lady tempts me, but I will resist the temptation. We do not know when this vaccine will be ready because I will not allow it to be rolled out before it is clinically safe. And anyway, the independent regulator would not license it before it's clinically safe. She asked the question about how we will treat people who have been vaccinated and those who haven't been vaccinated. And the problem is that until we know the epidemic modifying effects of any vaccine, that is to say, not just how much it protects an individual, but how much it stops transmission, then we won't, until we can assess that and monitor that, that is the point at which we can make further judgments about the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the social distancing rules that we have in place. So we will keep that under review and monitor it extremely carefully.
Chris Grayling.
Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on what he's done to secure access to supplies of what we hope will be approved vaccines very soon. He's done a fantastic job with that, as he has with the expansion of testing and the 15-minute tests. But can I take him back to the issue of testing in the aviation sector? Prior to the pandemic, we had the biggest and most important aviation sector in Europe. Since the pandemic, that sector has collapsed. And yet last week, Lord Bethell told the House of Lords that the Chief Medical Officer believes that the aviation sector is a low priority for testing. It may be a low priority in his eyes, but economically it's vital to us. Can I urge him to make sure those 15-minute tests are made available to the aviation sector at the earliest opportunity?
Yes, the expansion of testing capacity obviously opens up the number of different uses that it can be put to, and we're working very closely with the aviation industry. My right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, is leading those discussions, but I'm heavily involved in them, and I hope that we can make some progress soon.
Video link. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A constituent's father is in a care home. He's non-verbal and relies on touch to communicate. She says, I've not been able to hug my dad for over 8 months. I've not been able to hold his hand. I've not been able to take his youngest grandchild to meet him. 8 months into this crisis, will the Secretary of State urgently set out the scope of his pilot key worker status scheme? Will he accelerate its implementation and tell us when a combination of regular rapid testing and PPE will allow my constituent to safely hold her dad's hand again and put an end to this slow torture?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady puts the point very movingly. This is an area that the Minister for Care is leading on with great compassion, and I hope that we can make some progress soon.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This news of a vaccine is very welcome. However, it comes at a time just as Wales is leaving its firebreak and England has entered its own lockdown. This kind of diversion has caused confusion and some anxiety. So can my right honourable friend confirm that this vaccine will be available in all parts of the Union, And does he also agree that it's because of the actions that this UK government has taken in things such as the pre-purchase of doses that has given us this access?
There's absolutely no doubt that we have worked together as a United Kingdom to put ourselves in a strong position when it comes to access to the Pfizer vaccine, and work together to ensure that should it come off the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine will be available across all parts of this United Kingdom. I pay tribute to the work that I anticipate the NHS in Wales will be doing to deliver the shots into arms across Wales. But this is a UK-wide programme and is yet another example of why the UK is so strong when it works together.
Barry Gardner.
The Secretary of State's aware that priests have been unable to administer the sacrament to those dying in care homes. Rabbis have been unable to secure a minyan in order to say the Kaddish. How will his government now try to ensure that they recognise that a person's spiritual needs are critical for their mental health, and that this is just as important for people's physical health?
So of course we recognise exactly that, and I think the Honourable Member puts it well, that ministers are working with faith leaders as to how we can come to an arrangement as soon as possible to allow both the communal prayer that was discussed in this House as we brought in the regulations around the lockdown, and also all other aspects of nurturing worship.
Leonie.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Grimsby and Diana Princess of Wales Hospital, we currently have twice as many COVID patients in ICU as we had at the height of the previous lockdown. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that despite the very good news regarding vaccines, that it's absolutely essential that people in England adhere to the lockdown rules so that we can get our reproduction rates down, and also we can reopen our businesses as quickly as possible?
Yes, my honourable friend puts it absolutely right, and it's the reason for the caution that we're showing in government. There's understandable excitement at this news of this vaccine, but we're cautious because the single most important thing is that until we have a vaccine, and we don't have a vaccine yet, until we have a vaccine, people have to follow the rules in order to keep people safe, and that's true across Grimsby and the whole country. And I know that the team at the hospital in Grimsby are working incredibly hard in difficult circumstances, and it is tougher this second time in Grimsby than it was first time around. I pay tribute to them, I thank them, and the best thing we can all do to support them is follow the rules and do our best, play our part to reduce the transmission of this disease.
Video link. Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. For the vaccine to be effective, widespread take-up is required. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said a strategy to counter the utterly ridiculous and extremely dangerous anti-vaxxer misinformation was to hope people won't listen to those types of arguments. Can the Health Secretary assure the House that his department is working on a more detailed strategy than the Prime Minister to counter this misinformation?
Yes. Video link. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State's update is very welcome news for the shielding community, and I hope they will be among the first to receive the vaccine. However, at my meeting with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer last week, she informed me that 15,000 children were still being asked to shield this time round. What does the Secretary of State say now to the parents and carers of those children, given that he's just confirmed they will not receive the vaccine?
Well, of course, we will continue to work on a clinically led basis with everybody across the country who needs support. You know, the vaccines were not trialled on children, and it would absolutely be a clinical decision as to how to take this matter forward. I'm very glad that the Honourable Ladies had the opportunity to talk to the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jenny Harries, who leads on shielding policy. It's a very important and very sensitive subject.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The amended graphs used to justify the lockdown now show a 40% reduction in the death rate in the upper quartile as against their first presentation. So the NHS would have coped, wouldn't it?
No.
Yvette Cooper.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mid Yorkshire Trust now has over 280 COVID patients. That's more than 70% higher than in April, and they have fewer staff in place to cope. They can't use the Harrogate Nightingales because there aren't any spare staff to send there. The staff are doing an amazing job, but I am really worried about the pressure they are under. Will he work urgently with Yorkshire hospitals in order to get them more support and more staff in place over the next couple of weeks when the pressure is likely to be greatest?
Yes, of course. We're working with hospitals across Yorkshire, across the whole country, to try to make sure that we have the most capacity available. It's true that the numbers going into hospitals across Yorkshire continues to be far too high, and there's an awful lot of work we need to do. But the most important thing is that we get this virus under control in order to bring that number of admissions down.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I join others in congratulating my neighbour on ensuring that our country has its share of this very promising RNA vaccine? But on the subject of the previous question and capacity, isn't it the case that one of the key reasons we should be prioritising health and social care staff is not just because we prioritise those who are protecting us, but by ensuring they are first in line for the vaccine should it come forward and be proven safe? That will help to boost hospital capacity at a crucial time of the year.
Yes, this is a really important point, that part of the challenge and the reason for having to have a second lockdown was because of NHS capacity. The more that we protect those who work in the NHS, the fewer are not available to work, precisely as the Right Honourable Lady previously said, and the more capacity we have in our NHS.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As families begin to dare to hope in the possibility of a vaccine, it is vital that we prioritise mental health, resilience and confidence in learning amongst our young people. And our outdoor education centres in Cumbria and across the country are uniquely equipped and able to help with just that. Yet most of those centres face closure, essentially because the government advice remains against residential school visits, even though outdoor education centres are just as COVID safe as schools. Would the Secretary of State agree to work with the Department for Education to try and change that advice and to make sure the outdoor education centre remains open?
I'm very happy to look at this with my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary. This is, of course, a DFE lead, but I'm very happy to do my bit.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. May I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend on the work he's done securing the vaccine. And if I could just bring it back to the here and now, because as he quite rightly says, there's a long way to go on that. What I think has been slightly overlooked in the statement in the Chamber is his announcement of the 10% of lateral flow tests to local areas, and this is very important. Now, my right honourable friend has done an incredible job, Mr Deputy Speaker, of keeping me and other Leeds MPs informed as we've had the crisis move forward, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But could I ask my right honourable friend, and he may not be able to answer this now, but could I ask him to write to me about, does these lateral flow tests going to have an impact on the tiering system, because Leeds numbers are still exceptionally high, but hopefully they will change during the lockdown. So if there is going to be some changes to how the tiering system works, could I ask my friend, if he hasn't got the answers now, whether he could write to me at a later stage, perhaps when it's had some consideration.
I will write to my honourable friend on exactly this. The more that we can do to get these infection rates down during lockdown, of course, the easier it will be to get out of it, and places can get out in lower tiers.
Rupert Hug.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Have the bumps from me too. Good to hear some good news on the way about the vaccine and hopefully on vitamin D. But can I ask the Health Secretary, earlier on in this pandemic, people with non-COVID health issues were told not to suffer in silence. Now we hear that non-elective surgeries are being cancelled. I think at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, they're all off. What's the advice now, and could it potentially be losing lives if it's the wrong advice?
We want to have as little impact on the rest of NHS activity as possible. Of course, in some of the high prevalence areas, we are having to take that action. That is a decision that takes into account local circumstances. It is not a blanket national decision as it was in March. But the most important thing that we can all do to keep our NHS open for non-COVID treatment is abiding by the rules and having that lockdown in place.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to may I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for securing the vaccine, a ray of hope for us all, and I look forward to hearing more about the developments in the coming weeks and months. And will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the military who have worked tirelessly to deploy the mass testing of this vaccine? And could my right honourable friend update the House on plans that he may have for the military to be utilised with the vaccine in the coming months?
Absolutely. The armed services of this country have played an amazing role during this pandemic. Now, I have talked about it as a war against a virus in which we're all on the same side. And the military have done their bit, are doing their bit, and there's a lot more that we're going to need from them in the future. They're involved in both the mass testing and in the vaccine rollout, and I'm very grateful to the support they've given.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've learnt today that mass testing of students is to take place in order to enable them to return home for Christmas, which will be widely welcomed. We have a very large number of students in Leeds. Could the Secretary of State tell the House, is that testing going to be handled by the universities themselves or the excellent public health team in Leeds led by Victoria Eaton? And if so, how will that dovetail with any rollout of mass testing to Leeds in due course, so all of the bits of the system fit together?
The Right Honourable Gentleman asks a characteristically critical question and puts his finger on a vital logistical point, which is that we are planning to help students to get home safely with the assistance of mass testing. And in places like Leeds, the mass testing that's being made available to the Director of Public Health. Of course, these things must be dovetailed. The universities will be in the lead on the mass testing of students, but they will absolutely draw on the public health knowledge and expertise of the local council by their nature, because although we've all become something of public health experts over the past 11 months, the professional support from the public health team in the council, I think, will be critical in this task.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's announcement on the rollout of mass testing for NHS staff, and I congratulate him on securing so many doses of the vaccine. It's wonderful news that the efficacy of the first of these vaccines seems to be so very high. But I have read in newspapers over the last month countless pundits telling me that there would be no vaccine and that the right thing to do was to let the virus rip and try and protect a few vulnerable people. Doesn't this just show that it's actually right to listen to the scientists and the real experts rather than pundits who would have put millions of people's lives at risk?
Well, my honourable friend feels very strongly about this point, and it is understandable because the strategy that we've pursued, of course, has been one that we suppress the virus whilst we work on the vaccine. And with this progress towards a vaccine, we're not there yet, but with this progress, it demonstrates why we've taken that strategy to protect life, even though we know that there are consequences, very challenging consequences, for instance, for businesses and for other parts of society. And the reason we've done it is because we have a good degree of confidence that a vaccine will come and be able to make a very, very significant contribution to solving this problem without the huge risk that would be implied by not suppressing the vaccine because of its impact on taking the lives, especially of the most vulnerable.
Video link. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's fantastic news that 10,000 rapid lateral flow tests will be going to Dudley this week, and subsequently around 30,000 more will be being used locally. But what guidance is going to be issued to directors of public health as to how these rapid tests should be targeted?
Well, there will be guidance given, and we're engaging directly with directors of public health, and I'll make sure that the team from Stoke and from Liverpool who've been piloting this can have a chance to talk to other directors of public health, including in Dudley. But what I'd also say is we're not putting stringent rules around the use of these tests because we want directors of public health to use them in ways they think will work and are important locally, and then to feed back on the effectiveness of their use so that we can learn and keep learning about this rollout. So we are sending them out with guidelines and with for instance, instructions on how to use them and some of the logistics, but also saying to the directors of public health, use your professional expertise and tell us how you did it and what worked and what didn't, and then we can all learn from each other.
Video link. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituent Kelly Shears is an emergency ambulance care assistant with North West Ambulance Service. And in 2015, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. After treatment, she went into remission and went back to work. During the pandemic, she chose to continue to work on the front line despite her medical history. Now, her yearly checkup and mammogram did not happen in April. And in early October, she was told that not only had her cancer returned, but it has now spread into her bones. Kelly has asked to meet the Secretary of State to discuss the situation now affecting her and thousands of others. But we haven't had a reply to my letter on that sent 3 weeks ago. Will the Secretary of State agree to that request?
Yes, of course I will. It's an incredibly important subject. It underlines the fact that by controlling the virus and taking the action to suppress it, we allow the other activity that the NHS needs to do, which is incredibly important, precisely as the Honourable Lady sets out. And so I'd be very happy to meet with her and her constituent and listen very directly to the experience and see what we can do to help.
James Sunderland. Mr Deputy Speaker, Lockdown 2 has been very divisive across the UK, not least in my own constituency of Bracknell. Are there any circumstances in which my right honourable friend might consider early easing of restrictions, perhaps in low infection areas?
We always keep the data under review, and we're always looking at what we can do. Our goal is to get out of this lockdown into the tiered system. I think focusing on that and focusing on get the numbers down, because even in Bracknell, where for so long the rate of infection was incredibly low, and we had seen that rise in the rate of infections, and so it is important to get it under control in Bracknell as elsewhere in the country.
Video link. Ben Bradshaw.
Because of the growing number of COVID patients being treated in hospital, my local NHS would like to use the Exeter Nightingale Hospital for inpatient care, but they don't currently have the staff to do so. So can I ask the Secretary of State, what exactly is the purpose of the Nightingale hospitals when there aren't the doctors and nurses to staff them?
Mr Deputy Speaker, there are of course record numbers of staff in the NHS, and there's been an increase of over 13,000 nurses, for instance, in the last year, and we've had those returners come back into the NHS. In fact, the Honourable Lady from the chair of the Select Committee asked this question. I didn't answer it, so I will now, and I'll answer both together, which is that the Nightingale project, hospitals are incredibly important as additional surge capacity, but part of that surge involves the staff in the NHS having to themselves each look after a higher proportion of patients. That surge is not something we want to put in place unless we have to. And so having the Nightingales there is important. They can be used, in fact, as the Manchester Nightingale currently has patients in it, but it is better for both patients and staff if people can be treated in the existing hospitals, even as we expand the number of staff that are available.
Video link. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Following the rise in the real living wage, will the government now do the right thing for care workers, as well as for UK government workers on outsourced facilities management contracts, all of whom have worked throughout the pandemic to make workplaces safe and ensure that they are paid the real living wage?
I'm absolutely delighted, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the living wage now means that there's been a sharp rise in the pay of our lowest paid staff right across the country, right across the UK, because we introduced the national living wage. I think it's something this whole House can get behind. It's true in in social care, as the Honourable Gentleman mentions, and in other professions, and it's something that I'm really proud to have played a part in bringing about.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend well understands the importance of families being able to see each other this Christmas at the end of a very difficult year, and he understands the lengths that people will inevitably go to be able to see families and loved ones this Christmas. Now, without making any predictions about what the situation will be at the end of the year, can my right honourable friend at least confirm today that the intention on the part of this government is to work with the devolved administrations so that we have one clear set of rules covering the whole United Kingdom, and for the first time during this pandemic, a set of rules that are clear, consistent and fair right across the UK?
I really hope that the talks that are underway can come to a set of principles and set of rules across the UK for Christmas. So many people travel across the UK, including to and from Wales over the Christmas period, even more so than in the rest of the year, and I hope we can bring this to fruition.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister said that not enough people are self-isolating when asked to. Does the Secretary of State accept this might be because if you are traced by the COVID app, you are not entitled to the same financial support as if you receive a phone call?
Well, we are working on ways to ensure that those who are traced through the app also get support. The challenge is that the app is, by its nature and by design principles that our friends and colleagues in the tech industry insisted on, it is anonymous, and therefore translating an anonymous system on the app into an identified payment is a challenging process that we're working through.
Lockhart.
Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his efforts with regards to a vaccine and for his commitment on equal distribution throughout the Union. Nurses and care workers in my constituency daily are in the front line in the fight against COVID, putting themselves and their families at increased risk whilst trying to save and protect us and the NHS. They too will play a key role in the administering of a vaccine in the very near future. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that the pay nurses receive falls short of what it ought to be given the skilled and responsible nature of the role? And would he agree with me that a pay rise is due for UK nurses?
Madam Deputy Speaker, happy birthday. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I understand the question that the Honourable Lady is asking on behalf of her constituents. I pay tribute to my opposite number in Northern Ireland, Robin Swan, and because it is a devolved matter, I hope that she'll understand if I'm going to allow him the discretion to provide an answer to that question rather than answer on his behalf.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Students and their families across the country will be very pleased with the news that students are to be offered COVID tests as early as the 30th of November to ensure they can go back for Christmas. Subsequent to the Secretary of State's answer to my honourable friend to Leeds Central, can I ask whether or not similar arrangements will be put in place in January so students can then return to study in the new year?
One step at a time.
Thanks for asking.
Video link. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the rollout of the mass testing and the vaccine update. Very positive news and offers the hope the country needs to get back to the normality to normality as quickly as possible. But can I ask the Secretary of State, given the unique challenges of the infection control in university cities and what is touched on already, will the wider rollout of mass testing be available across university cities like York for the whole population?
Yes, the rollout and the 10% of population per week availability of lateral flow tests is available to Directors of Public Health right across the country. And if that hasn't already been organised with York, I would urge the Director of Public Health in York to come forward and work with the team to make that happen.
Clive Evan.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State recognised in his statement that the task will be vast of 40 million doses, and he has also said that he's got orders for 300 million further doses. How far away are we from those further doses coming on board, and doesn't that make that a very huge task to undertake at local level? So what's the involvement of local government in terms of coordinating this?
Yes. It will be a huge task, and the NHS is leading on it, and of course the NHS reaches all parts of this country. In terms of the flow of the future doses that we've secured, the only one that is in immediate prospect is AstraZeneca, and we hope to be able to hear the sorts of results. It would be wonderful to hear the same sorts of results that we heard from Pfizer yesterday for AstraZeneca soon. After that, it is next summer before the next vaccine candidate comes on stream. And so the focus of the rollout plan at the moment is on delivering the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca projects if they pass the safety test.
Caroline next.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to prioritise those working in the health sector for the rollout of the vaccine. But will he also consider the important role that those working in the teaching profession and in childcare play? Because by them being in work, it enables children to be in school or in care, and therefore allows their parents to be economically active.
I absolutely, of course, understand that the importance of that. I mean, hence having protected education and kept schools open as much as possible, and through this second peak. And in fact, I'd pay tribute to schools who have, in very, very large part, stayed open. Some children have had to go home, and we're looking to see how we can use testing to reduce the need for children in bubbles to have to isolate if an index case has test positive in a school.
Video link. Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend probably saw the BBC News last night featuring the Royal Derby Hospital, where staff were saying that the numbers that were in hospital now were higher than the peak earlier this year, and that they were exhausted but would keep going. Is there any opportunity for the Nightingale staff that perhaps are on standby that could come in and assist, so that some of these hard-pressed doctors and nurses could actually have slightly more time off so that they wouldn't be quite so exhausted?
Well, I want to thank staff at the Royal Derby for the work that they're doing. These are difficult circumstances, and one of the reasons that we brought in measures which I know are difficult is in order to protect the NHS from the increase in the number of cases, which, as she says, in Derby is now higher than in the first peak. Unfortunately, the solution that she proposes is in fact the other way round, which is that the NHS Nightingales provide extra space and extra capacity, but we need to stretch the existing workforce to use them, to staff them if they are needed. It's another reason to take the measures that we've taken in order to protect the NHS.
Antoniazzi.
Penblwydd Hapus, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There have been a number of concerns raised today about the staffing in the NHS. So can I press the Secretary of State to give his commitment to ensure that cancer professionals are not redeployed away from cancer treatment and care so that they can beat the backlog rather than build it even further?
Yes, that is absolutely our goal, absolutely, to keep all cancer treatment going during this second phase. So far that has been successful everywhere, even where hospitals have had to postpone non-urgent activity, they have not postponed cancer treatment. So this is incredibly important to me personally, and I strongly support the recommendation that the Honourable Lady sets out.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could I join my right honourable friend in praising the work of the Vaccine Task Force in securing so much of this first encouraging vaccine and the work they've done to have a good portfolio. If I could turn to the joint inquiry of the Science and Technology and Health Committee, which met this morning. We considered test and trace, but it seems to me one of the key parts is the third part, the isolation part. This 20% figure has been bandied about, but Baroness Harding was able to give us a preliminary figure of 54% of people who did manage to observe staying at home. But would you agree with me that we actually need more data about this? We need to understand how many people are staying at home. I realise it's not completely binary, but also how that varies between people who've got positive tests and people who've been asked to isolate. And like my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, the chair of the Health Committee, would he look at Sir John Bell's suggestion that people who are merely contacts could be released from quarantine earlier through rapid testing?
I'm happy to look at all of those constructive suggestions, and maybe I can also take this opportunity to put on the record my thanks to the Vaccines Task Force and to Kate Bingham personally for the leadership that they have shown in being able to procure the 340 million doses that they've achieved, which I know that the whole country is grateful for, the 40 million in particular of the Pfizer vaccine and the work that they've done.
Video link. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. What update can the Secretary of State give the House on the new strain of coronavirus identified in mink in Denmark? And aside from the travel restrictions now in place from Denmark, what steps are being taken to stop any new outbreak?
The Honourable Lady raises an incredibly important point. We acted very fast, including working with the Scottish Government and the other devolved governments, to take the action that we did at the end of last week. We are concerned about this outbreak, but I'm concerned about the fact that this virus has become virulent across the mink population. And I think that there is an international case on public health grounds for addressing this question of mink farming, which we banned in the UK 2 decades ago. It was due to come to an end in Europe in 2023 anyway, but it is, people will have their own views on animal welfare grounds, and I've certainly got mine. And, but clearly on global public health grounds, there is a case to do everything we can to stop the retransmission of this virus into an animal population and then back again, which can lead to these sorts of mutations that we've seen. We'll do everything we can to keep people safe. I just also should put on the record, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you may indulge me, my thanks and admiration of the government of Denmark, who have responded to this also very quickly. Our actions are in no way shouldn't be interpreted as a criticism of the Danish government, who have acted very fast. It's a painful economic decision that they've taken very swiftly to cull their mink population. We are merely acting to keep this country safe.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I really welcome today's news that we are now much closer to the rollout of vaccines. However, as of today, the Royal Stoke Hospital in my constituency has more than double the COVID patients that it had during the first peak. And this is combined with record high levels of COVID-related staff absence. This is of concern to me, to fellow MPs from Stoke-on-Trent, and I know my right honourable friend from Newcastle-under-Lyme shares this concern. Will my right honourable friend join me in praising the heroic efforts of our NHS staff in Stoke-on-Trent and help us to deal with this situation until such time as the situation is improved by the rollout of vaccines?
Yes, I know Stoke-on-Trent Hospital, and I think that the people who work there do a brilliant job, and they are a great team, and they work so closely and well for the people of Stoke-on-Trent and indeed Newcastle-under-Lyme. And I know that Stoke has got an outbreak under control a couple of times in this virus. In fact, they had a second peak in the summer, which they got under control, and then this is really a third peak in Stoke. Stoke Council have also worked closely with us on the early rollout of mass testing, and one of the pilot even before Liverpool. And I want to thank everybody at the Royal Stoke for all the hard work that they're doing and urge everyone in Stoke and across the country to respect social distancing and follow the rules, because that's the best way to support our NHS.
Video link, Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Clearly, I represent a vast and extremely remote constituency. In my constituency, there are groups of elderly people who are potentially very vulnerable to the COVID virus. Could I ask the Secretary of State, when he talks to the Scottish Government, to make sure that these people are reached out to with the vaccine, because it would be too bad if one part of Scotland was to lose out against another as the vaccine is rolled out?
Yes, our principle is to roll out the vaccine across the whole of the UK according to clinical need, and that's what we should do.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Teesside Dementia Links is an amazing charity run by some of the most inspiring people I've ever met. They deliver support to families and individuals dealing with dementia, and have told me of some of the pain suffered by so many in our care homes, unable to see loved ones. I welcome the recent guidance and would like to ask my right honourable friend if he'll continue to do everything he can to ensure that we can safely and meaningfully reunite families.
I really do. And, you know, I'm a fan of new technology, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not going to deny it. But the reason I'm a fan is because it can help improve people's lives. And this is one example. New technology, testing technology, quite intricate biochemistry, will help to enable people to see their loved ones in care homes. And I can't think of a better example of how new technology can really help improve people's lives. And I can't wait to see it happen.
I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and answering questions to 55 members of Parliament. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the 10-minute rule motion, and then we'll suspend for 3 minutes. So we will start with the 10-minute rule motion on jet skis licensing. Howell Williams.
Mr. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to establish a system of licensing for drivers of jet skis to create the offence of driving a jet ski without a licence and for connected purposes. Jet skis, or otherwise motorised personal watercraft, are powerful machines of up to 300 horsepower, which can reach speeds of up to 40 miles per hour on water. They are easy to tow, and they're easy to launch from any beach. Compared with other watercraft, they're not expensive, and their use has been growing for many years. I have been told that this year sales of jet skis locally in my constituency and in Gwynedd are up by 30%. I think that honourable members will be surprised to hear that in the UK anyone can use a jet ski. No licence is required. There is no compulsory training nor a test of competence. The recommended lower age limit is 12 years. Local authorities under the bodies have limited regulatory powers, such as setting speed limits in some areas and specifying launching areas. But enforcement is difficult and it can be expensive in a time, of course, of cuts. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many boat owners, local residents and people who just want to use our wonderful beaches in peace, local bylaws, speed limits within yellow buoys and such like are just not sufficient. In the words of a local beach warden to me this summer, he said, "I can tell them till I'm blue in the face not to come close to the bathers, but there's nothing I can do to stop them." My own local authority, which has led the way on this matter, passed a motion last month calling for proper regulation of the use of jet skis. The Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales, Mr Arfon Jones, has voiced his support. Chief Inspector Mark Armstrong of the North Wales Police told me, "Bob blwyddyn yn ardal Gwynedd a Môn, rydyn ni'n gweld achosion o bobl yn cael eu lladd neu brifo yn arw ar ôl digwyddiadau tebyg. Every year in Gwynedd and Anglesey, we see cases where people have been killed or seriously injured as a consequence of incidents like this. Current regulatory measures are useful, but cannot be a substitute for what is really needed, and that is a proper licensing system with training and a test of competence, and proportionate enforcement properly funded. Antisocial and less commonly the dangerous use of jet skis, sometimes associated with prior alcohol consumption, have long been a problem. This year, though, anecdotally at least, the problems seem to have got much worse than usual. Perhaps because of COVID, more people have taken their holidays in the UK, and their jet skis, of course, are easy to tow and easy to launch. But this is not a short-term problem. My predecessor, now Lord David Wigley, campaigned for legislation after a tragic jet ski accident in our Carnarvon constituency over a generation ago. It is significant, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the current House of Commons library paper on jet skis dates from 2010. The majority of jet ski users are, I'm sure, both responsible and law-abiding. There are also responsible commercial users who quite reasonably don't want to be burdened with extra regulation. And proper quality training is available, for example, from the Royal Yacht Association. And I am particularly grateful to Mr Howard Pidding from the RYA for his briefing on the matter. He details the work that a number of organisations are already doing to enhance the safety and encourage the responsible use of jet skis. This includes the RYA Personal Watercraft Proficiency Course, a guide to effective management schemes, advice and signage, and safety videos in collaboration with the RNLI. He says that improved communication and education will reduce incidents, and I am sure that he is correct. And there are also considerations about the liberty of all to use our waters, our freedom of the seas, which is very dear to many, many people. This bill, though, does not aim for a general system of regulation of all marine leisure use. It is to address the special case of jet skis. Tragically, this summer, we again had fatalities on the shores of Gwynedd associated with the use of jet skis. There were deaths elsewhere, in constituencies represented by supporters of this bill. There were incidents of injury, and many honourable members will have heard reports and seen pictures of jet skis being driven at speed close to bathing beaches, sometimes even where children were swimming. These craft being driven at high speed, even where there were speed limits. Accidental collisions with boats and near misses. Disturbance of people fishing from the shore, such as in my hometown of Carnarvon, such as at Dock Victoria, and of jet ski drivers intruding into nature reserves. There have been incidents of aggressive and threatening use. Only this morning, I was sent a picture of a jet ski on the Menai Straits, performing a very tight circle around a lone kayaker. Just one other example will suffice, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, I received a video of an incident on the 21st of September from someone I will not name for reasons that will become obvious. The video is just 10 seconds long, and it is a shame, Mr Deputy Speaker, with all these screens around us, that I cannot play it here in the chamber for 10 of your seconds. The person who took it was on what looks to me like a paddleboard, a little outside the Yellow Buoys area. He describes the circumstances like this. The jet skier was in a party of people, including a couple of youths, who were all taking turns on the jet ski. They were pulling high-speed stunts within the Yellow Buoy restriction zone. There was nearly an accident with some young swimmers. The video, as I said, taken from the paddleboard, then shows the jet ski driver, a burly man in his 40s, driving towards us at increasing speed and, crucially, outside the Yellow Buoy area. As he gets near, he swerves towards us, looking directly at the camera and shouting something inaudible, which is probably unrepeatable in this chamber. He then turns away, causing a heavy wake, and makes off at speed back towards the shore, back towards the Yellow Buoy area. The action is clearly very dangerous and could have resulted in direct injury had he misjudged the speed or direction, or possibly the need for a rescue. or even a drowning. The paddleboarder adds in his email to me, when the video was shared on our local Facebook page, others commented that they had left the beach early due to noise and irritation. This is particularly significant in Wales and other tourist areas, which attract people specifically because we offer peace and quiet to enjoy our extraordinary natural environment. Tourism, after all, accounts for up to a third of our economy in some areas. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UK is the only state in Europe without a licensing system, and there is a long list of other countries around the world which control their use. Now, the Department of Transport propose to bring forward consultation on draft legislation that will consider bringing personal watercraft within the definition of a ship for the purposes of the Merchant Shipping Act. Now, I'm not against this, and it would possibly catch the burly gentleman that I described earlier. It might deter some irresponsible users, but I believe that it is not a substitute for proper regulation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, lawmaking is a long, slow grind, even without Brexit and COVID clogging up the works. But the overwhelming support I've had on jet skis, with not a single person against, will, I hope, persuade the government to act with a proper licensing system. It cannot come too soon. Thank you.
I've had no indication that any member wishes to speak against the 10-minute rule motion, so I will therefore pose the question. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Right Honourable Liz Saville-Roberts, Ben Lake, the Right Honourable Sir Roger Gale, Geraint Davies, Paul Maynard, Jim Shannon, Tim Farron, Pete Wishart, Sir David Amis, Claire Hanna, and myself, sir.
Howell Williams.
Jet skis licensing bill.
Second reading what day?
February the 5th, 2021, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Speaker, rather.
2021. Thank you very much. We will now suspend for 3 minutes, and if we can have sanitisers on the dispatch boxes, please, during that period of time. Thank you. Please leave with caution. Order.